and restoring us to that paradise is in the sky 3 times. There's 3 books in the sky. It's telling us about the Bible from beginning to end. And but of course, with Nimrod establishing that Tower of Babel and becoming the first king over a kingdom, one of the things he was doing was he was trying to rebel against God's established order of things. And it's commonly believed that even in the Tower of Babel, he placed his own zodiac, put his own horoscope meaning on it, and astrology to this day still goes by that line of thinking, because it's of the devil. It has to do with Baal worship and the worship of Nimrod and Semiramis. And but we've talked about how that the Bible, we believe that God is the one who named all the stars, and therefore he even taught Adam what the constellations were all about, how they were for times and seasons, like it says in Genesis 1, and how that was passed down among the patriarchs, so that even today when you look up the sky, Leo the lion don't look nothing like a lion, like it probably did when it was first shown to Adam. Because at some point it lost its distinctive shape, but still the constellations still have their basic names because we know of the stars. When you look up the Arabic and Hebrew names of the stars that make up each constellation, they reveal what that constellation was all about and how it shows that it had a Bible base. Well, so here's old Dr. Bow. Of course, he's up on all that, being an astrophysicist, that believes the King James Bible. And of course, he's been to our church many times, and I'm looking forward to getting him back here real soon, as soon as we can, and have him speak again. So in his little publication, he puts this out quarterly. Did you get yours, Brother Keith? Did you get one?
I just got it this week.
Good for you. Yeah. Did you get to read it any?
Only perused it a little bit, then I set it
Yeah,
down.
that's okay.
I looked at that and kind of read the caption of it, but I didn't finish it.
Did you get it, Brother Ed?
Not yet, I usually get mine a lot later.
Well, anyhow, so I read it immediately, as much as I could, then I read the rest a little later. So what he's got on here, now here's a picture of the Zodiac. It's the Palmyra Zodiac, that's what it's called. The Palmyra, there's a little town north of Damascus, Syria, really. It's quite some distance because there is a big desert between Damascus and Palmyra. And Palmyra is the modern Arabic name for this town. But I'm going to read this article to you because it's just so good and it's so interesting and so revealing. And what it does is, like I mentioned Thursday, it'll give us some insights into how the Jews and the Hebrews understood the zodiac, the 12 signs. Because like we read Thursday in Genesis, when Joseph had that dream that there was the sun and the moon and the 11 stars all bowed down to him, and he was the 12th star. And how that all 12 tribes of Israel would bear one of those constellations on their banner as they were marching even through the wilderness. Each would have his distinctive banner that represented his tribe. And so here's this old Palmyra Zodiac that was discovered in the 1830s by a English archaeologist, and we're going to read about why it's significant. Now, the zodiac is more or less square, and it has an eagle, an image like of an eagle in all 4 corners, with outstretched wings, representing the 4 winds. And then here's the actual zodiac itself. Here's Virgo, and then of course here's Leo, and then there's the crab, and then there's the twins, and then there's the ram, then there's the no, that's Taurus, and then the ram, then Pisces, the fish, then Aquarius, and Sagittarius, so forth, so on, and Scorpio, and then the scales. But then here's what's so fascinating is in the center is an old man, which you're going to learn is they believe was probably Abraham. And then probably then there's a lady here below him, which is probably Sarah, Because of course, if you were a Jew, wouldn't you kind of trace yourself back to Father Abraham?
Sure.
You know, and then there's probably Isaac over here. Then here's another lady, but her hair is like, it has points to it, like it's the sun shining behind her head. Then there's another lady up here of some royal look to her, and then above that is a lady that looks like she's a lady, but instead of having a long flowing hair, she's got like wings coming out of her head. And then another man over here. So there's images here. There's a total of 7 images in the center that have some significance. And so as I read this, you'll have some sense of understanding. Of course, we can always make a copy of that too. Then you can add it to your collection of stuff. Now here's an actual photograph of the thing before ISIS blew it up. Again, ISIS went over and blew it all up, dynamited it. And if you could go and look up Palmyra on the computer, you can see, yeah, this is one of those. There's been many famous movies made there and stuff, because it's a city that sits right there on a wonderful big lake. And because again, from Damascus, it's all desert till you get to this area, and then there's pockets of water and water sources, and that's why Solomon built this city. And it could be that even Solomon had all this built. That's why it's very significant. But over the centuries, of course, it was abandoned, and so it's been admired because here's all these pillars, these old Greco-Roman pillars, seemingly, and standing, and ruins, and temples built, who knows to what. But lo and behold, it has very much significance because the Bible teaches, history teaches us that it was King Solomon himself who built it, and the Bible does reference it. So, wow, it has more significance than I'm sure the world and all the Muslims think it has, amen? So I want to read you this little bit, so bear with me if you can. If you can't, I understand, go to sleep. In the last issue of the Biblical Astronomer, I presented some evidence that supported the conclusion that the constellations were named and recognized by the most ancient astronomers, of whom I specifically named Adam and Abraham. Also in my editorial, I mentioned that ISIS laid siege to the city of Palmyra in Syria, and that the curators of the Palmyra historical complex were negotiating with ISIS not to destroy the ancient historical site, which housed, among other buildings, the ceiling relief commonly called the Palmyra Zodiac. It appears that the curators were successful in their negotiations, although 2 ancient Muslim shrines were deemed blasphemous to ISIS and were blown up. Well, since he wrote this, they blew it up too. Because I researched it. So here's a modern view. Today, the consensus regarding the Palmyra site is that the ruins are Greco-Roman. The Zodiac is located in the temple of Baal, the same as Baal, B-A-L, as B-E-L. The Zodiac is assumed to picture Zeus or Jupiter as the sun and Venus as the moon. I'm not at all convinced given the inscriptions that surround the Zodiac. In the first third of the 19th century, Bartholomew Prescott presented to the Royal Asiatic Society of London, England, his study and analysis of the Palmyra Zodiac. And you can buy the book. It's for sale for $16, $12. It's only about 20 pages long, but it's still available. He wrote a brief history of the site, and this is what he wrote. Since the year 1678, when the existence of these ruins was first made known by the Arabs to the English factors in Aleppo, several learned and skillful antiquarians have turned their attention to an examination of the inscriptions which were discovered on the walls and the columns in an unknown language. But so far as my inquiries have extended, I have not found that any of them has hitherto been interpreted, or even a discovery has been made of the alphabet of the language in which they were written, which turns out to be an ancient form of Hebrew. Prescott came to 3 conclusions in his research. Number 1, that the structures were erected by King Solomon and that the orders, since termed Corinthian or Ionic, were first introduced into architecture by Solomon under God's guidance. Secondly, that the signs of the zodiac originated with the Hebrews, and that they emblematically refer to events and characters recognized in sacred history, and that the position of the signs on the zodiac of Palmyra points to the age of the world in which Abraham lived. Because see, Solomon would be looking back at the founding of their nation as the children of Israel. Thirdly, that the inscriptions said to be in an unknown language are in the ancient Hebrew, that some of them were written soon after the palaces were built and others after the Roman conquest. In support for this first conclusion, Prescott refers to 1 Kings 9:18, where the scripture says, "And Solomon built Baalath and Tadmor in the wilderness in the land." Now there is in the desert north of Syria a town called Palmyra by the Greeks, but the Syrians call it Tadmor. Tadmor's inhabitants claimed, at least into the first half of the 19th century, that it is the place that Solomon, they're called Saliman en Daud, meaning Solomon, son of David, built. This is corroborated by Josephus, who in the 6th chapter of the 18th book of his Antiquity, let's see what he said. Josephus wrote, "Solomon went as far as the desert above Syria and possessed himself of it and built there a very great city, which was 2 days' journey from Upper Syria and 1 day's journey from Euphrates and 6 days' journey from Babylon the Great. Now the reason why the city lay so remote from the parts of Syria that are inhabited is this, that below, meaning to the south, there's no water to be had, and that it is in that place only that there are springs and pits of water. When he had therefore built the city and encompassed it with very strong walls, he gave it the name Tadmor. And that is the name of it, still called by at this day among the Syrians, but the Greeks named it Palmyra. Prescott mentioned Volney, who also observed Tadmor, and Baalath, which is today called Baalbek. He writes that the inhabitants of both Baalbek and Tadmor are absolutely convinced that Solomon invented Corinthian columns. So even these great columns that we see at the Parthenon in Athens and all these places that are many times they're just small sections of a column, but then once you stack the column together, it's a complete column, several stories high. But they always have that smoothed out denture going up them. And they're saying it was King Solomon that figured all that out, how to make something look like it's straight when the truth is it's all curved.
Right.
Otherwise, if you put a straight column in, they'd all look like they go like that because of the optical illusion. Well, I get beside myself. Prescott further notes that the historical belief that the Romans invented the Corinthian order runs into trouble here, since the columns were already ancient when Rome took these cities from Greece. For more details, the readers refer to Prescott's book, which will appear in a PDF form in a DVD that Brother Bob's going to start selling. Because the man also wrote some books in the 1830s explaining how that, boys and girls, the world is not spinning. The world's sitting perfectly still, and the sun goes around the earth. But we'll find those books later on. Prescott takes it for granted that the zodiac originates with the Hebrews. I agree by virtue of the scripture, particularly Joseph's dream of the 11 stars and the sun and the moon, doing obeisance to him as the 12th star in Genesis 37:9. Prescott's theory assumes that Abraham is the central figure in the Palmyra Zodiac. His rationale is as follows. Now, this is what the old man wrote. This is so fascinating. Listen to this. Abraham, the venerable and manly form placed in the center, Josephus, speaking of him, says, he communicated to the Egyptians arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came to Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning. So Prescott said the Egyptians didn't even know how to figure math or anything about astronomy until Abraham taught them that. Isn't that fascinating? Mm-hmm. Now, okay, now we'll go around the zodiac. Aries. And then you'll see, and then of course there's that picture too. That below it is a picture of that man. Isaac on the right side of Sarah, and below the ram, in the allusion to the one caught in the thicket at his memorable offering. Because Isaac would never forget the ram that was caught in the thicket.
Right.
Sure.
That Abraham would offer the ram in his place when God asked him to sacrifice his son as a burnt offering. Then Taurus, this being the next in the ascension to Aries, the sign of Isaac, is emblematical of strength, in allusion to the unequaled strength of the faith of both Abraham and Isaac at the offering, so pathetically described in the book of Jasher. It may likewise allude to the powerful temptations with which both were beset previous to the offering, as related in the same book. The same figure is metaphorically applied to David when placed in very trying circumstances. Remember Psalms 22 that Jesus quoted when he hung on the cross? But in Psalms 22, David wrote, "Many bulls have encompassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have set me about. They gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and roaring lion." Psalms 22, 12 to 13. Gemini. Well, Sarah below Abraham, with a presentation of two boys with outstretched arms, is if in the act of striving with each other, probably alluding to the enmity born by Ishmael and Isaac, as mentioned in Genesis, in which it is declared that Ishmael will be a wild man, his hand against every man, and every man's hand against him. Genesis 16:12. Cancer, the crab. The Hebrew word karav, or crab, means war, and likewise to seize, to take hold. The akrab, or scorpion, in its form resembles a species of the genus Cancer. Either is sufficiently expressive of the character of Ishmael and his descendants, the Arabs. Nature has provided the crab with a kind of armor for defense and two formidable weapons for assault. Leo, the figure of Rebekah, on the left of Sarah, is distinguished by 12 rays surrounding her head, and by the lion below her, alluding to her son Jacob, or Israel, who was the great father of the heads of the 12 tribes. Balaam, speaking of the power and mystery of Israel, says, "He coucheth, he lay down as a lion, and as a great lion, who shall stir him up?" Virgo, the figure with wings, one who had wings on her head, called the Virgin, holding out a palm branch, being in connection with or immediately succeeding the sign of Leo, the emblem of Judah, seems to prefigure that from this tribe would proceed the Messiah to the covenant of peace to the world. Then Libra, on the left of Rebekah, is Leah, with a crescent on her head, an allusion to the emblem of the moon applied to her in Joseph's dream as that of the sun was applied to her husband. The scales below her referring to her sons Levi and Judah, to whose tribes were given the government and the administration of the laws. Scorpio, the next sign in succession is the scales of justice. In succession to the scales of justice is the scorpion. Significantly points out he stings of conscience which follow disobedience or a violation of the divine law. Sagittarius, on the left of Leah and on the right of Jacob is Rachel. She's represented with wings on her head. Among the Hebrews, wings were figurative of spiritual or heavenly existences or appearances. The Jews have a tradition, and the same thing is mentioned in the book of Jasher, that her son Joseph, in his affliction, when the Ishmaelites were taking him down to Egypt, visited her grave and that her spirit appeared and spoke words of consolation and encouragement to him. The sign of the archer under his figure alludes to the words which Jacob on his deathbed addressed to Joseph, when he said, "The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the mighty hand of Jacob." Capricornus, this figure with the head of a goat and the tail of a fish, connected in succession with the sign of Joseph, significantly alludes to the character and designs of Potiphar's wife and the severe temptations which he virtuously and triumphantly overcame under the trying circumstances in which he was placed. Aquarius, this sign is placed under the figure of Jacob, which is on the right of Isaac, and evidently alludes to the next great event in Hebrew history, namely the going down with his family to Egypt, which country is signified by the figure of the Nile. And this figure exactly resembles the image of the Nile, which was brought by Vespasian out of Egypt and is, I believe, still to be seen in Rome. Then there's Pisces. The next great event was the departure of the Israelites from Egypt and the tremendous catastrophe that befell Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea. The representation of two fishes hooked and connected together by a line are strikingly elusive to the entanglement and overthrow of the Egyptians in the sea. To this great event, God, by the prophet Ezekiel, seems to allude in the following denunciation against the last pharaohs: "I will put my hooks in thy jaws, and I will cause the fish of the rivers to stick unto thy scales, and I will bring thee up out of the midst of thy rivers, and all the fish of thy rivers shall stick to thy scales, and I will leave thee thrown in the wilderness." Ezekiel 29, 4-5. So, isn't that interesting? I thought that was so interesting, and I thought it was so significant to consider the constellations. Again, we already have some sense of what they mean by the stars in the Hebrew and Arabic names. But now here, you got this old man Prescott in 1830s saying how he would understand and how the Jews would have perceived it. Now, I'll just finish his article here if you'll be with. I got 5 minutes, I think I can get it done. Dating the Palmyra Zodiac. Prescott estimates the date of the creation of the Palmyra Zodiac. To arrive at his date, he assumes that the heads of the eagles on the four corners of the zodiac point to the four colors which are geared to the sun, and these are the points at which the sun is located on the first day of spring, which is called the vernal equinox, and the first day of summer, which is called the summer solstice, the first day of autumn, called the autumnal equinox, and the first day of winter, which is called the winter solstice. In arriving at this date, he used a Jewish calendar, which does not accurately measure the years since creation, since the Jews will stop their calendar when there's no Jew living in Jerusalem. Thus, its count for the year of creation differs from the Scripture's count for the age of the earth by roughly 300 years. In scriptural years, assuming that Prescott's interpretation of the eagles is correct, I compute a rough date of the Palmyra Zodiac to be about 1700 BC. For comparison, Solomon's date is circa 1000 BC. 1700 BC is again roughly AM 2300, assuming the creation to be about 4000. Prescott believed that Abraham himself commissioned the creation of this Palmyra Zodiac, and that it is barely possible given the uncertainty in pinpointing the colors. But for Abraham to have made the zodiac himself, we have the problems that most of Jacob's progeny, who figure prominently in Prescott's theory, were not yet born. When we compare figure 1 with the front cover of this issue, it's clear that in the intervening 185 years that elapsed between 1830 and today have not been kind to the zodiac in particular. It's also clear from the position of Rachel's winged figure that Prescott adjusted his figures for what appears to be a foreshortening in the original form. I must at this point remind the reader that Arabic theology says that any man who makes an image or takes a photograph of another person becomes responsible for that person's soul. As a result, human forms at sites like Palmyra may be subject to erasure. In the last issue, we noted that said erasures have changed some constellations from human form to animal form, and Prescott continues from all his evidence thus far. Prescott wrote, "These reflections have naturally led me to a consideration of the etymology of the word zodiac. The Hebrew word Zodiac means justice, righteousness. Zadok, instead of Zedek, Zadok means righteous or just, and zodiac in rabbinical Hebrew means true, certain. Therefore, in whatever sense the term is taken, its application to the circle of the signs is just and appropriate, whether in reference to the parent path of the material sun, the emblem of the Son of righteousness, because of Malachi 4:2, the Son of righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings." Prescott identifies several descriptions and is able to match the characters to the Hebrew alphabet. One of the inscriptions mentions a date, 3,333, which agrees within a year or two of the date in which Necho, king of Egypt, made his expedition to Charshemes of the Euphrates. The inscription translates as Necho went up as a lion. The righteous king of Judah, Josiah, died fighting against Necho after disobeying God's order not to fight Necho, who had merely asked for permission to pass through Judah on his way to Charshemes. Another text may have come from Solomon himself. "Trust not in the high place nor the valley to give strength, but choose ye the covenant. I spread the wing, O inhabitant of the world. O people, with righteousness exalt divine truth. Lift up yourselves by the righteous things of the law." We conclude that Tadmor was built by Solomon and that he definitely visited the city. Whether or not he also commissioned the zodiac sealing remains speculative, though. And we do know that we have evidence that the Hebrews knew of the constellations and assigned a constellation to each of the tribes of Israel. Joseph's dream, which parallels in some respects the wonder representing Israel, not Mary, in Revelation 12:1, the woman with the standing on the earth with the moon on her head. What wonder is a yet future event as stated in the first chapter of Revelation, where the rest of the book is grouped by things which must shortly come to pass. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was significant because it gives us a little insight into how the Jews probably looked at those signs and why they would adopt them, not because of the horoscope and not because of Nimrod, and not because of astrology, but because of their own history that they'd gone through, because God had made them that great nation, and their fathers were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.